Hi, this is Laura Holyoke. I have a short PowerPoint recording covering the structural lens. One note about this recording in particular and the structural lens is that it is the lens that what I record and what is talked about in the Bowman and Deal book is pretty much the same, whereas in the other lenses I will introduce quite a bit more of outside information. A reminder that we are covering organization development looking at it through lenses, and therefore just because everything is different doesn't mean anything has changed. You'll find that the structural lens is a good place to start. It doesn't consider people in the mix, and I think therefore it simplifies things. If you want to see a rose-colored world, you put rose-colored glasses on. However, most of us forget to change the lenses that we're looking through, and that's the whole idea of reframing, that we can look at different issues, different situations, and use multiple lenses or perspectives, if you will, to think about the same thing in more than one way. Oftentimes we have our own point of view, but when we really open our mind and allow others' points of view in, we can see an issue, a situation in a different way. If you are an avid reader and want to check out a book that shows a great example, I think, of looking at a situation from two different perspectives, the book Competing Frames, Anne Fadiman's The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. It's about a Western medicine. It's about the difference between Western medicine and an immigrant Hmong family. They clash over how best to care for their very sick little girl who was diagnosed with severe epilepsy, and the culture conflict that obstructs her treatment is what the book is all about. The Hmongs were relocated to an area, I think, down by Los Angeles. They thought that when Leah's sister went out one day and slammed the door, that her spirit went out the window. So they really looked at getting her spirit back as something more spiritual, whereas American doctors looked at it in terms of scientific factors. And they wanted to treat her according to Western medicine. It's important to note that the issues remain the same. However, how we view them is what changes, or how we can help others view them in a different way. Like I said, looking through a structural lens illuminates the non-human aspects of an organization, which is kind of nice because I think humans get in and tend to complicate matters. So some metaphors that we can use for structure include a blueprint, the design of an organization, its architecture, the framework, linkages, foundation built, anything that does not really relate to specific humans. A good way to think about structure is to think of building blocks. How is it that we build in organizations? What do we put in place first? And how do we restructure an organization? What gets changed in restructuring? Usually, when we talk about organizational change, the easiest changes to make are the structural changes. They tend to be pretty straightforward. We might change a process. We might reorganize a workflow. We might use new letterhead, update of technologies. All these are structural changes. Elements of structure that we can see in an organization, pretty straightforward. The goals of the organization, the vision, the mission, the plan in which we define what the organization is going to accomplish. Then two other pieces, how the work is divided among people and how that work is coordinated to make sure it gets out the door. Every organization has two different pieces. One is the division of labor, that is tasks and differentiation of those tasks. And second is the coordination or integration of how they fit together. So the division of labor are various tasks that need to be performed, who performs them, specific roles, what they do, geographic locations. All these are divided and we know who does what. The coordination and the integration talks more about when the what gets done. So how do you put these pieces together in a way that they fit well? At home, we do, or in our families, we do a lot of both division of labor and coordination integration. If you can think about the most basic functions that we do, it may be that grocery shopping is a division of labor, cooking dinner, washing dishes, paying bills, the yard work, and it could be that division of labor is I cook, he cleans, I do yard work, he pays bills. Coordination or integration then is making sure that we get the timing right in these, that you can't do the dishes before you cook dinner. So it's how we coordinate to make things work in organizations. Within coordination, I can't talk, my apologies, we have two options for integrating. One is vertical coordination and the other is lateral or horizontal coordination. Vertical coordination comes down from the top. Mom and dad tell children how things are going to be, the way things are going to work. Rules and policies that are established in organizations, in households, if you will, is another way of coordinating the work. And then planning and control systems. What's going to happen in the future, when monthly bills get paid, who's going to do them. And then lateral, horizontal coordination usually gets done more quickly than the vertical coordination. And these are meetings, task forces, networking, that the people oftentimes that are doing the task are also those people that are deciding the when and how they get together and making sure one piece goes to the next. Okay, so if we're watching The Office, these are a couple of good areas to look at, especially the vertical coordination and how rules and policies are followed, how the different authority levels work with one another. Here's another way to view that coordination, both vertically and horizontally, if you were looking at an organizational chart. And then if we were talking about hierarchy, here's the first organizational chart, a little bit vertical. I like this sign, failed infrastructure ahead, mostly because we tend not to think about the infrastructure unless it has completely failed us and it's looking us in the face. Where, as I said before, it's one of the easiest changes to make in organizations, in our families. So to look at recognizing when structure or that infrastructure that we build needs to be changed. Bowman and Deal lay out and talk about several structural imperatives. One is the dimension of size and age. As size and age increase, the complexity and the formalities increase inside organizations. The core process and technologies that are performed in an organization must align with the structure. The environment, that is what happens outside of the organization. If it's stable, we tend to have simpler structures. However, during turbulent times or uncertain times, in the environment, we tend to, inside, become more complex and have to have a flexible structure. Our strategies and goals, the variation, clarity, and consistency of goals requires that we have appropriate structural adaptations as things change and time moves on. The information technology dimension tends to the more information technology we have across the organization. It permits flatter, more flexible, and decentralized structures to work more efficiently. And then to look at the nature of workforce in the structure of our organizations. That more educated and professional workers tend to need and want greater autonomy and discretion in completing their jobs. One of my favorites, and yet I believe one of the simplest ways to look at structure and organization, is to look at the core processes. That is, what does an organization exist to do? All organizations have inputs. They have throughputs, or what are called technologies, and then they have outputs. So the inputs, raw materials. In a college, they may be uneducated students. The elements of transformation, that is the technologies, are the teaching, coursework, other activities that students do. And then the outputs are usually our ideal products. They're educated citizens, ready to contribute in healthy ways to society. Again, another way to look and restate the inputs, outputs in technology. One of my favorite pictures is on the upper right-hand side of the screen. And but I want to talk about two kinds of technologies that all organizations tend to have. Each organization has a core technology that is what the organization does and what everything else is hinged on. So it is why the organization exists, ultimately. Where all organizations also have support technology. So Thompson says, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. Support technology is, if we take the university for example, support technology is something like Sodexo. So the dining and food services on campus is something that is not core technology to the university. And a lot of institutions, ground maintenance is no longer supported by the university. Instead, that's support technology. So now we hire out to Sodexo instead of having all the food and dining done within the university, and many institutions hire outside grounds maintenance. They contract out to have that done instead of having those employees go through the system. An interesting note is that all support technologies have their own core technologies. So Sodexo's core technology is providing food on campus. Well, in its most simplistic terms. So Thompson says that when our external environment gets crazy, the organization buffers its core technology first. That is what it pays attention to. Most other pieces fall by the wayside, or they get contracted out. Pullman and Deal talk about several structural tensions, and I think most of these can be viewed pretty easily in the office to look at that differentiation versus integration. As organizations grow, become more sophisticated, or more complex, the more costly the coordination strategies become. To look at gap versus overlap in terms of what people are doing in their jobs, overuse versus underuse versus overload. A person that doesn't have enough work and a person that has too much work that he or she simply cannot accomplish it all. Lack of clarity in completing one's job versus lack of creativity in performing that job. Excessive autonomy versus excessive interdependence. Too loose versus too tight. Goal-less versus goal-bound. Irresponsible versus unresponsiveness. So again, how do we see these structural tensions play out in the office? An important element of structure in organizations is to look at organizational boundaries. Boundaries tend to be fluid. Most organizations have boundaries on a continuum. So boundaries help determine pieces like how do you know if you're in or out of an organization? Do you belong? And boundaries also shift. That is, sometimes what's internal to organizations may shift to being external to organizations. William White writes about two types of organizations. Again, this is on a continuum. On one end of the continuum are porous organizations. These kind of organizations, individuals in them have no clear sense of the mission or goals. There tends to be high levels of rationalization of why work doesn't get done, and low levels of disclosure and intimacy within the organization. The rules and norms are implicitly defined, not written down anywhere. Compartmentalization of work results in low levels of internal interaction. People go in their offices, shut their door, do their work. We tend to find invisible organizational members. That is, people who have retired on the job in these organizations. Low levels of identifying with the organization as belonging to it, working for it, and then also a lot of absent or sporadically involved leadership. On the other end of the continuum, White writes about characteristics of enmeshed or closed organizations. In these organizations, we find very low boundary permeability with aggressive gatekeeping functions. Hard to get in, hard to get out. We find excessive demands for individuals' times and emotional commitment to the organization. A focus on the group rather than individual activities and achievements. The expectations are you will be at the picnic over the weekend for the organization, and it will look like A, B, and C, and you don't deviate from that. Minimal internal boundaries that provide access to private space. What you do is everybody else's business. In these organizations, we tend to find extreme demands for loyalty in the workers. The management style is somewhat like the workers need to be controlled by fear, force, or charismatic persuasion. Oftentimes, individuals in these organizations are controlled through tyrannical or authoritarian leadership, or even through a manipulated consensus. Tends to be a harsh response to behavior that deviates from the norms. Extreme levels of group cohesion and mutual dependence, and then implicit rather than explicit organizational family rules. You'll probably find rules written down, but there'll be a clear understanding of the family rules that go beyond this. So again, what do these look like in the office? And can you see where the office may be on the continuum of organizations and boundaries? Part of the structure of an organization is to set up control systems. So knowing there's a temperature gauge here to control something, a control switch, the electrical, I can't remember what it's called. My apologies. Some internal control systems that we find in almost every organization. The first are rules and policies. The second are budgets and how budgets get carried out, who determines the budget. Looking at the authority structures also sets up certain structure in organizations. The supervision and how it's done, how employees are evaluated, annually, weekly, monthly, the rewards and incentives that are given out in organizations, the contracts, what people are expected to fulfill and do, and then the assessment of individuals' work. I think a really important piece to look at in organizations is the decision making in terms of how are decisions made. So the control over decisions in terms of who gets to make the decision. Is it a task force? Is it upper level management? How the decisions will be made, if they're by group, are they by private vote? Is it public vote? Control over the information provided to those in order to make decisions. Think about if a jury trying to decide on a court case, certain information is given to them, and they are also told to not pay any attention to certain pieces of evidence, if you will, that's given to them, that they cannot base their decision on that. And then finally, looking at control over developing alternatives or solutions, and which alternatives will be offered to decide upon in terms of the decision making. And then finally, we have control of resources, not just money, but information, skills that individuals need, that the organization possesses, time, how that's looked at, the calendars, and schedules. So for every organization, this part of the structure and control of the resources in the structure look very different.